There was a day when a 10-year war ended in a single night, and a city that believed it could never fall burned into legend. This is the fall of Troy. Before the smoke and the screams, Troy was not just a city, it was a gateway between east and west. Its mighty walls stood guard over the Hellespont, a vital trade route connecting the Aegean to the Black Sea. Gold, grain, and timber flowed through its ports, making its kings wealthy and its people prosperous. It was a jewel of the Bronze Age, a fortress so grand it was said to have been built by gods. But power creates envy, and envy creates enemies. Across the sea, the kingdoms of Mycenaean Greece watched Troy's influence grow. They were a civilization of warriors, traders, and kings bound by a shared culture and a fierce competitive spirit. Agamemnon of Mycenae, the most powerful among them, saw Troy not just as a rival, but as an obstacle to Greek expansion. The stage was set for a conflict far greater than a personal dispute. Legend says the war began with Helen, the queen of Sparta, whose beauty was known throughout the world. When Paris, a prince of Troy, visited Sparta, he fell for her, and together they fled across the Aegean. But behind the myth of a stolen bride lay the cold realities of politics, pride, and ambition. Helen's abduction was the spark, but the fires of war had been building for generations. The insult to Menelaus, Helen's husband and the king of Sparta, could not be ignored. His brother, Agamemnon, seized the opportunity. He invoked an ancient oath, calling upon all the kings of Greece to unite and reclaim Helen and, with her, Greek honor. One by one, they answered. From every corner of the Greek world, kings gathered their armies. Menelaus sought revenge. Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, offered his strategic mind. And from the north came Achilles, the greatest warrior of his age, leading his Myrmidons, hungry for glory. He was a man born for battle, a force of nature who sought not land or gold, but an immortal name. 1,000 ships were launched, a fleet so vast the sea itself seemed to disappear beneath their sails. It was an unprecedented gathering of military might, all directed at a single target, the city of Troy. They sailed under the watchful eyes of the gods, each warrior carrying hopes of glory and fears of death. As they approached the Trojan shore, the scale of their task became clear. Troy's walls were immense, towering over the plains, a seemingly unbreakable line of defense. The Trojans, led by their wise King Priam, his noble son, Hector, were prepared. They had allies, resources, and the will to defend their home. The Greeks landed on the beaches, establishing a vast camp that would become their city for the next decade. The war had begun. For 10 long years, Troy endured. Its walls, legendary and unbreached, stood as a testament to its strength. The Greeks, unable to take the city by storm, laid siege. The conflict settled into a brutal rhythm of attrition. Greek raiders plundered the surrounding lands for supplies, while the Trojan army sallied out from their gates to meet them in combat. The war became a graveyard of heroes. It was a relentless cycle of skirmishes, duels, and failed assaults. Year after year, the seasons changed, but the stalemate remained. The Greek camp on the beach grew into a sprawling settlement, a city of soldiers weary of a war with no end in sight. Inside Troy's walls, citizens grew gaunt from dwindling supplies, their hope resting on the shoulders of their champion, Hector. Heroism and tragedy defined the war. The battlefield became a stage for legendary contests. Great warriors met in single combat, their fates watched by both armies. The most famous of these duels was between Hector and Achilles. Hector, fighting for his family and his city, Achilles, fighting to avenge the death of his beloved friend Patroclus. Their clash was a storm of bronze and fury. In the end, Achilles' divine rage prevailed and Hector fell. But his death did not break Troy's spirit, it only hardened its resolve. And for the Greeks, the victory was hollow. Countless warriors had fallen on both sides. Brave Ajax, wise Nestor's sons, King Priam's many children, yet neither side could claim victory. The gods themselves, it was said, took sides, turning the war into a cosmic chess match played with human lives. Achilles, Greece's greatest warrior, seemed invincible. A whirlwind of death on the battlefield, he single-handedly turned the tide of many battles. But prophecy had long foretold his doom, a short life filled with glory. During a fierce assault on the city, as he cut a path through the Trojan ranks, an arrow shot by Paris, guided by the god Apollo, found the one vulnerable spot on his body, his heel. Achilles fell. The hero who had seemed more than mortal died a mortal's death. His fall sent a shockwave through the Greek army. With Achilles gone, their morale collapsed. The war had claimed their champion. Just as with Hector gone, Troy had mourned its greatest defender. Both sides were now without their titans. The armies were exhausted, the leaders desperate. The 10-year war had bled both sides dry, leaving only bitterness and despair. It was clear that brute force would never decide this conflict. It was then that Odysseus of Ithaca, known for his cunning mind, devised a plan of deception. He proposed they abandon the siege, leave the beaches, and sail for home. But they would leave behind a gift for the Trojans, a colossal wooden horse, an offering to the goddess Athena for a safe journey home. The Greek leaders were skeptical, but with no other options, they agreed. Master craftsmen built the enormous statue, hollow on the inside. Under the cover of darkness, Odysseus and a select group of the best Greek warriors climbed inside. The next morning, the Trojans awoke to an astonishing sight. The Greek camp was empty. The ships were gone. On the beach stood only the giant wooden horse. The Trojans streamed out of their gates, their 10-year confinement finally over. They debated what to do with the strange offering. Some, like the priest Laocoon, warned it was a trick. I fear the Greeks, even when they bear gifts, he declared. But others, led by the prophetess Cassandra, whose curses meant her truths were never believed, were ignored. They pulled the horse into their city, breaking down a section of their own impenetrable walls to do so. That night, Troy celebrated. They feasted, drank, and danced in the streets, believing their suffering had ended. As the city fell into a drunken sleep, the trap was sprung. The Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse crept out, silent as ghosts. They killed the sentries and opened the city gates. The Greek fleet, which had only pretended to leave, had sailed back under the cover of night. A flood of vengeful warriors poured into the unsuspecting city. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The Greeks, filled with 10 years of frustration and rage, showed no mercy. They set fire to the homes, temples, and palaces. The sleeping city awoke to screams and the roar of flames. The Trojan men, caught off guard, fought desperately in the streets, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. King Priam was cut down at his own altar. The women and children were taken captive. By dawn, the magnificent city of Troy was nothing but a smoking ruin. A civilization was erased in a single night. Aeneas, a Trojan hero, managed to escape with a small group of survivors, carrying his elderly father on his back. He would wander the Mediterranean for years, eventually laying the foundation for what would become Rome, carrying the memory of Troy with him. The victorious Greeks gathered their spoils and their captives, including the now widowed Helen, and prepared to sail home. But their victory was cursed. The gods, angered by the sacrilege and brutality of the city's destruction, unleashed their fury. Storms shattered the returning fleet. Many of the heroes who had survived 10 years of war died on the journey home. Odysseus was condemned to wander the seas for another decade. Agamemnon returned home only to be murdered by his own wife. The victors found that their triumph brought them only more suffering. The fall of Troy became a timeless story, a dark and cautionary tale about the vanity of pride, the cost of war, and the thin line between hero and monster. The city itself vanished, becoming a legend, a mystery buried beneath the earth. For centuries, people wondered if it had ever existed at all. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists, guided by the ancient poems, began to dig. They found ruins, layers of ancient cities destroyed by fire, and evidence of a great conflict. The myth was real. Troy had been found. The story, once thought to be just a poet's dream, was anchored in history. It reminds us that behind every legend lies a human truth, that the echoes of a single, tragic night can resonate for thousands of years. Thanks for watching. But wars are not won by strength alone. After 10 years of endless siege, with heroes fallen on both sides and morale at its lowest ebb, the Achaeans knew that brute force had failed them. The great walls of Troy, built by the gods themselves, stood unbreached. Despair crept through the Greek camp like a cold fog. They needed a miracle, a new strategy, something Troy would never see coming. Sometimes, wars are won by deception. From the shadows of defeat stepped forth the most cunning of all the Greek kings, Odysseus of Ithaca. He was a man whose mind was his sharpest weapon, a master of strategy and guile. While others saw only impenetrable stone, Odysseus saw an opportunity in the Trojan mindset, their pride, their piety. He studied Troy's defenses, its gates, its watchtowers, and the psychology of its people. The Trojans believed their walls were their salvation, a divine gift that made them invincible. This very belief would become their downfall. Odysseus proposed a plan so audacious, so contrary to the rules of honorable warfare, that it was met with skepticism at first. He declared to the assembled Greek kings, "We will not break Troy's walls, we will make Troy open them." The idea was simple yet brilliant. The Greeks would feign retreat, pretending to abandon the war and sail for home. But they would leave behind a parting gift, a tribute to the goddess Athena, meant to ensure their safe passage. This gift would be a colossal wooden horse, an offering so magnificent that the Trojans would be compelled to bring it within their city, as a trophy of their victory. Inside its hollow belly, a select band of Greece's finest warriors, led by Odysseus himself, would lie in wait. Greek carpenters, skilled artisans who have built ships of war, now turn their hands to this strange new creation. Under the stars, the sound of saws and hammers filled the air, not with the noise of siege engines, but with the crafting of a hollow idol. Slowly, a giant wooden horse took shape on the shores before Troy, a silent, ominous monument to a war that was about to enter its final, deadliest phase. The next morning, the Trojan sentries atop the walls blinked in disbelief. The vast Greek encampment, which had scarred the landscape for a decade, was gone. The beaches were empty, save for the smoldering remains of their campfires and the immense, solitary figure of the wooden horse. A Greek soldier, Sinon, had been left behind, coached by Odysseus to spin a tale of betrayal and divine prophecy. He told the Trojans that the horse was an offering to Athena, made deliberately too large to pass through their gates, so that the Trojans could not claim its divine protection for themselves. The sight of the Greek ship sailing away toward the horizon seemed to confirm his story. A wave of jubilation swept through the city of Troy. After 10 long years of fear, loss, and confinement, the siege was over. They had won. The gates, sealed for a decade, were thrown open. Citizens poured out onto the plain, cheering and marveling at the abandoned Greek camp. Troy believed the war was over. Wine flowed. Songs echoed. The horse was seen as a sacred gift, a symbol of their hard-won peace, the favor of the gods. But not all were convinced. Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, rushed forward, frantically warning his people. "I fear the Greeks," he cried, even when they bear gifts. He hurled a spear into the horse's wooden flank, and the hollow sound from within should have been a clear warning. But the gods, or fate, had already sealed Troy's doom. In that moment, two monstrous sea serpents rose from the waves and coiled themselves around Laocoon and his 2 sons, silencing his prophetic warnings forever. The Trojans interpreted this horrifying event as a sign of divine punishment for Laocoon's sacrilege. Their last chance to see the truth was extinguished. Convinced the horse was sacred, they fastened ropes to it and, with joyous effort, dragged the instrument of their own destruction into the heart of their city. That night, Troy celebrated as never before. The city, which had known only the discipline of war, gave itself over to revelry. Torches burned brightly in the streets, music and laughter filled the air, and wine flowed freely. Exhausted and intoxicated, the Trojans finally fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, secure in their victory. The once vigilant watchtowers were empty. The city lay quiet under the moonlight, its mighty walls now a prison, not a fortress. Inside the great horse, Greek soldiers waited silent and patient. Claustrophobic darkness, the smell of sweat and fear. The muffled sounds of the city's celebration turning to silence for hours they endured, their hands gripping the hilts of their swords. Every creak of the wooden structure was agony, every distant shout a potential discovery. Odysseus was with them, his calm resolve the anchor that held their courage fast. At midnight, when the city was at its deepest slumber, a small panel slid open in the horse's belly. A rope was lowered, and one by one, the hidden soldiers descended into the sleeping city. They were ghosts in the moonlight, moving swiftly and silently through the deserted streets. Their first task was to kill the sentries and throw open the great gates of Troy. Once the gates were unbarred, they lit a beacon from the highest tower, a signal to the Greek fleet, which had not sailed for home, but had hidden behind a nearby island, waiting for this very moment. In the darkness, the sails of 1,000 ships turned back toward the shores of Troy. The Greek army, fueled by a decade of rage, flooded into the defenseless city. The trap had been sprung. The night exploded into chaos. The silent streets of Troy were suddenly filled with the screams of the dying and the war cries of the Achaeans. Fires, deliberately set, sprang to life in the houses and temples, the flames fanned by the night wind. The blaze grew into a monstrous inferno, casting a hellish red glow upon the city walls. What 10 years of siege could not accomplish, one night of deception achieved. The Trojans, roused from their drunken sleep, were disoriented and disorganized. They stumbled from their homes into a nightmare of fire and steel. They were slaughtered in their beds, in the streets, and on the steps of their own sacred temples. Troy, rich, powerful, and proud, fell in a single night. The heroes who had defended it for so long were gone. Hector was dead, and now, the aged King Priam, who had witnessed the destruction of his entire family and kingdom, was slain at the altar of his own household gods. The great towers of Ilium, which had touched the clouds, buckled and collapsed in the inferno. The palaces, filled with the treasures of generations, burned to the ground. The dream of Troy turned to ash. A few survivors, led by the hero Aeneas, managed to escape the carnage, fleeing into the darkness to carry the story of their lost city to a new land. The Greeks had finally won, not through the strength of Achilles or the might of Agamemnon, but through the cunning of Odysseus. The city that had resisted the greatest army in the world had been brought down by a wooden horse. And a simple, devastating idea. The fire that consumed Troy that night forged a story that would never die. In the centuries that followed, the tale of the Great War, its heroes, and its tragic end was passed down through generations of oral poets. Eventually, it was captured in the immortal verses of a blind poet named Homer. The story of Troy became immortal through Homer's Iliad. It transformed from a memory of a Bronze Age conflict into one of the foundational myths of Western civilization, a timeless epic of honor, rage, love, and loss. For thousands of years, many believed Troy was only a myth, a figment of a poet's imagination. But in the 19th century, archaeologists, guided by the words of the Iliad, began to excavate a windswept hill in modern-day Turkey. They unearthed the ruins of a great fortified city, layer upon layer of history, showing evidence of a powerful civilization and a violent destruction consistent with the legend. Its ruins still stand silent witnesses to pride, betrayal, and destiny. The broken walls and scattered stones are all that remain of Priam's mighty kingdom. They are a solemn reminder that even the greatest empires can fall. The fall of Troy is a lesson in ambition, the consequence of a stolen bride, and a decade of vengeance. But above all, it is a testament to the power of a single idea, proving that the human mind can be a far more potent weapon than any sword or spear. Thank you for watching this cinematic documentary. Subscribe to Aurem Tales for more stories of ancient wars and timeless legends.